Once upon a time, there was a master of music. He could play his instrument really well, and he had an apprentice whom he taught. The master wrote pieces of music and taught the apprentice how to play them. One of them went like this. The apprentice would then have a go at the tune, he'd make mistakes and the master would correct him. It was a very long process, but it worked. After a while, the apprentice got the tunes perfectly. That particular tune became very popular, and after a while, lots of people came to the master to ask him to teach the tune. He was happy to do it, but after a while, there were so many people who came to learn the tune that he really didn't have any time for them. It really started to make him cross. His apprentice had an idea, and it went something like this. Well, why don't you write down the tune? Now, nobody had written any music down before, everybody just learnt from their master. But the apprentice's idea was to take a sheet of paper and to write on that sheet of paper some dots. The dots would represent the notes, so the first note would be there, the next note, and so on. So it helped you learn the tune. So each of the notes is written on the page. This solved the problem for everyone in the village because they were now able to take away a sheet of paper that had the tune written on it, and the master was very happy because everybody was playing his music and he wasn't annoyed by all of those apprentices anymore. One day somebody from another village came and he recognised the master and said, "Oh, you're the guy who wrote that tune. Here, let me play it for you." The master didn't recognise the tune at all, and he said to the visitor, "That's not my tune. It doesn't even begin on a D." And the visitor said, "Well, all I had were these dots on a page. I didn't know which note it began on, and I don't know which notes they are that follow." So the master said, "Well, why don't I write a D at the beginning of the tune? Because the piece starts on a D. If I write a D at the beginning, you should be able to follow the rest of the notes from there." So he wrote a D, and the visitor had another go at the tune. He got the first phrase right, but the second phrase wasn't right because it didn't start on a D. And the master said, "Well, look, the second phrase starts on a D as well." And the visitor said, "Well, how was I supposed to know that they're, separated by this space on the page and I couldn't work out whether they were the same note or not, so I just gave it my best guess." And the master thought again and he said, "Well, look, you know what? Why don't I write a line? I'll write a horizontal line that represents all of the Ds, so everybody's going to get at least they're going to get the Ds right." So you can see I'm going to put the line in there like that, and that line there represents the Ds. So when you start a piece of music and there's a D written there and there's also a line, it means that you know that that's a D that it starts on, and also you know that any other dot that is on that line is a D. So the visitor had another go at the tune. He got the beginning of the phrases right, but the further he went down, the least accurate he was going to be. The master said, "Well, why don't we put in another line? Why don't we put in a line there? Because the first phrase goes from a D all the way down to this G. So why don't we put a G line here? Let's call that G. And that way we should be able to work out pretty easily the difference between the D and the G and the notes in between." Now, the visitor thought that was a pretty good system, but he also thought that the way that the master had written the notes was not going to work because they were too small to relate to this line that he'd written. So the master kind of rubbed everything out, and he thought a little bit about it, and he thought to himself, okay, well, probably the best thing to do is make them a little bit bigger, these little dots that represent the notes that I'm playing. So let's put that first phrase in, going all the way from the D down to this G, so that we know that the last note is a G. And that looked a lot clearer to the visitor, so the visitor decided he'd have another play of it and see how he went. The visitor got the first note right and the last note right, but the notes in between were a problem, so they added another line to represent the B. So the notes in between the D and the G were just fine, but every time you went outside of the D and G, it became a little bit more troublesome. So the master decided that maybe, you could put some more lines in. So he added another line above, and we're going to write in the second phrase here. And let's see how he goes this time. You can see that it worked. However, there's also some notes that go lower. As soon as he went lower than that G, he was lost again, so we needed to put in another line. After putting in 5 lines, the master said, well, look, that's it. Any more than 5, and I don't think you're going to be able to read it anyway, because it'll just be lines on a page and you'll spend all your time counting up to work out which is the D and which is the G, and it's going to be a real hassle. So I think that 5 lines is around about enough. So they stayed at that. The visitor played it and it was a success, and much better than just dots on a page. So whenever the master wrote a tune from now on, he used to start with 5 lines and he'd put a D there and he'd put a G there. Over time, his handwriting got messy and he decided to get fancy with the D and the G, and he just, sort of put a loop in the D and he joined it up to the G. And after a while, he forgot about the circle of the D totally and just sort of did a really fancy G, the loop of the D, and just the tail of the G. And he ended up with something that we call a treble clef. So the treble clef means that there's a D on that line there and a G on that line there. There's the G and there's the D. And if you use your imagination, it kind of looks like a G and a D. So let's draw our treble clef here. And let's see if we can work out what note is what. We know that that's a G. And we know that that's a D. What's this note? Can't be a G or a D. We don't know what it is, so we're going to have to work it out. The best way of working it out is to use your alphabet. Now, musicians are funny. They only can count up to 7. So in the alphabet, they go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then they go again. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So whenever you get to a G, you simply go back to an A. So after the G, we get an A. After the A, we'll get a B. And the space here, which is where this note is going to be a C. So it's no longer a question mark, it is now C. We know that it's a C. So every single time that you're trying to work out what a note is in the treble clef, imagine your G and your D in the treble clef, and then I want you to write out your alphabet all the way up to G and then start again so that you can work them out. That works counting up for a G or a D, but what about if we have to count backwards? Well, we simply use our alphabet backwards. So let's draw in a G here. We know that that's a G. And let's draw in a note underneath it. Well, all we have to do is simply go down in the alphabet, backwards on our page, to the F. And we know that that's an F.